States is like what happened there is there's still ripples of it in today's society.
Mm-hmm. For sure there is.
So I think it's going to be a whole thing about that.
Sweet.
Imagine like Atlanta
great.
burned to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Atlanta.
To the ground. Georgia. Travis, our new dude in here is from Georgia. Italy. What's your name again, man? Zach.
Aitlian.
Yeah.
Isn't it Zach now?
Yeah, that's what he told me.
Nice.
Too bad everybody's got to know my name too, Thomas. There we go.
Thomas, what's up, Thomas?
Yeah, man.
Thomas, nice name.
I like it.
It's always kind of depressing when you meet someone and they're like, I hate my name.
I don't know if I've met anybody that really hates their name.
I've met some people where they'll have a name like John or something and they'll be like, I fucking hate
Oh, yeah. So cliche.
Or Chad these days, or
oh God,
what's the other?
Yeah, what if your name was Karen? Oh
Karen.
God.
Yeah, that's the.
when I worked in politics, while I was
he's gone.
College, yeah, he's too. When I worked out in politics, there was this horrible woman who worked with us, and this was before the Karen meme. And then like years later, like the whole Karen meme started, and one of my coworkers was like, "Wait, guys, am I tripping, or did the worst woman I ever worked with name was Karen?" I was like, "Yeah, no, her name was Karen."
There's got to be a statistic in there somewhere. I mean,
that's funny.
Do you think the truth just came out of like midair, maybe? Like Karen just happened? There must have been like a preponderance of Karens before the Karen thing happened.
I mean, clearly, do you think the truth of the God came out of nowhere? There must have been a preponderance of gods.
He's a classic Karen. It's fitting. Certain names conjure up certain traits. There's websites that are kind of dedicated to that. Like, what do people think of when they hear the name Travis? And they'll tell you, and sometimes it's spot on. You know, like you get an
doubting
idea
Thomas when they see me.
I have to look, but like you know, you get an idea in your head of someone named Bubba, you know, or like another like Lauren, like that's my sister.
So apparently, I didn't know this, but Dandan is like the name of like a Japanese like noodle dish.
Oh,
and for a long time, like when I went to college, my roommate thought I was gonna be like this Asian guy, like this small like Asian kid. So
he was just expecting a bowl of noodles to show up.
Nope, got this.
Yep.
I'm gonna do my shares here, but we're live, so we can start whenever.
Oh, we're live now on YouTube?
We are
live.
We are live.
Okay.
He's back.
Oh shit!
I really got to get one of those auto share engines.
You really should.
They're kind of expensive.
I mean, how many social media platforms are you
oh my God.
using?
Well, there's the platform. Like I think it's like 6 platforms, but then there's like 3 or 4 accounts on each. Platform,
that's
and I always forget.
That's a lot of money. That's like $200 a year. It's insane.
Damn, man, y'all got the mics and shit, bro. Y'all are official over here.
We have to use the mic.
Hey, you know what?
Damn.
Your mic sounds just great. I'm glad you found the Discord. 8Lian.
Yeah,
I already told him your name. Sorry.
I feel like a 70-year-old trying to work a phone for the first time.
Yeah, man. That's how I was when I first started Discord. For some reason, Discord looks dauntingly complicated when you first start. That was my I was just like, what is this? Like all these lists.
But it's really not complicated.
Because you used to see like pictures in feeds with like a couple comments on social media.
Yeah.
But I find this to be like so much better. I love it. There you go. Now we can see what an 8Lian looks like. Okay, I gotta share this in the community tab. Let's get some peeps in the room.
Add them up.
We just look like the gray. We just look like the Grays, man. Just like, you know what I mean? Just like they always say they look like.
That's hilarious.
Oh.
No, but y'all was talking about. I play a little bit too, so you know.
Very nice.
Nice. That's what's
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, I was gonna learn a song today, but I got sidetracked.
What were you gonna learn?
I don't know. I was gonna do something for my dad for Father's Day.
That's
and
nice.
Then,
I
yeah,
love that.
yeah, but then I kind of bailed on the idea. But I
I'm
probably,
sure he would appreciate anything.
yeah, I could play songs for him, but I wanted it to be like a song about dads. But they don't have any of those. All the songs
There's
are
got to
about
be one on
moms.
YouTube, man. There's got to be a song about dads on
All
YouTube.
all the songs are about moms. Like
Yeah.
Mother, I'm coming home. You know, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I'm about to look up one.
But the one I was thinking of was the Cat Stevens. I think it's Cat Stevens.
Yeah.
Cats in the cradle and the silver spoon.
Do you know
Little boy blue and the man on the moon.
And then you're coming home, son, I don't know when. And you get together then.
Yeah.
Or
that's fucking.
Do you know what
dope.
my favorite one is Old Man by Neil Young.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Look, there's a video from like the late 70s of Neil Young playing live with just his acoustic guitar and his harmonica.
Yeah,
it's incredible him playing that song.
Nice.
Okay,
I'll check that out.
Let's get this going.
Hell yeah.
Engage.
So today's topic, we're going to be talking about human rights, and the main questions that we're trying to discuss, first of all, is what are human rights? Why do we have human rights? Like, where did this concept come from? And how can we philosophically or scientifically ground them in a way that makes them objective and absolute, or even if that's possible? So I think the best way to do it, I'm just going to start out by reading a few notes that I've been taking over the past couple of days, because this is not a topic that I'm well versed in. This is a topic that I have a little bit of understanding from taking political theory classes in college and kind of doing my own research. So I'm trying to share it with everyone, get everyone's input, and hopefully we can move forward this discussion and later in the future talk more and more about it.
Nice.
Excellent.
So first of all, let's define what rights are. Before we can talk about human rights, we kind of have to agree on what rights are. So rights are entitlements to or not to perform certain actions, to or not to be in certain states, or entitlements that others can or cannot perform certain actions, or be or not be in certain states. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I really like the usage of states.
Right?
Yep.
I just have to say that.
Yep, because it is brain states.
It could also be physical states, right?
It could be topological state. It could be whatever the hell you want.
Yes. Yes.
That's why my third. Oh, I'll just do a quick plug. That's why my third book is called "The State of Potential Theory." I used to call it my argument for the theory of everything, but I think theory of everything is kind of the wrong label for these theories. But anyway.
Yeah.
And so the question is, who gets the rights, right? So let's say who? Children, animals even get rights. We even have environment rights, right? Even the right gets an environment. Mm-hmm. Which to me is really interesting because it plays on this idea that even today we don't realize that we're doing it, but we're acting in a very similar way that ancient societies did, where we're in a way anthropomorphizing and using literary elements to personify nature, animals, and giving them human characteristics.
Mm.
So let's just do something very simple. I'm gonna share my screen. Travis, do you mind streaming it? And we're just going to read through the UN's Declaration of Human Rights.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I'll stream it for sure as soon as I see it here.
May I read something really quick?
Absolutely.
Okay. So metaethics, I think is what we're talking about, is the branch of philosophical ethics that asks how we understand, know about, and what we mean when we talk about what is right and what is wrong. An ethical question pertaining to a particular practical situation, such as should I eat this particular piece of chocolate cake, cannot be a meta-ethical question. Rather, this is an applied ethical question. A meta-ethical question is abstract and relates to a wide range of more specific practical questions. For example, is it ever possible to have a secure knowledge of what is right and wrong?
I would agree.
Okay.
I think that's spot on.
Good foundation. Good foundation. All right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's go. We'll just go over we'll start with the preamble. Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and alienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Whereas disregard and contempt from human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind, and the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief and freedom from fear and want has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration for common people. So just from the first paragraph, we can tell that this is laying off a much more effect-based argument, where these are here because they enable people to live their best life, kind of grounding in.
Yeah.
Whereas it is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law, whereas it is essential to promote and development of friendly relations between nations. Whereas the people of the United Nations have in the Charter reaffirmed their faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, and in the equal rights of men and women, and have determined to promote social progress and better standards of life and larger freedom. Whereas the members of states have pledged themselves to achieve, in cooperation with the United States, the promotion of universal respect and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms. As common understanding for these rights and freedoms is the greatest importance for full realization of this pledge, and therefore the UN pledged. So there's a really interesting website before we continue on with the rest of the human rights that I have found, which is a map. Where is this map? I do not have this map anymore. Well, it's a map that lets you see each country's and how much of the UN's proclamations of human rights they have taken on into their constitution. Okay. So France, for example, has 17. I know France has like 18. The US only has 7, which is along the line.
It's like a human rights score, basically.
Yes, the US has only chosen to ratify 7 of them within its law. Canada, really? I think, is also around like 13 or 14. So let's go ahead and see what we think of these. Article 1. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and consciousness and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. What do you think of this? How does this make sense as a right? In the way that you understand rights?
Born free?
By itself, it sounds pretty good.
By itself, it sounds pretty good.
Yeah, it seems pretty reasonable. I mean, not every person is conscious, but we can't go by the outliers. So it's saying all conscious beings. Not everybody is going to work together, but it's just kind of an axiomatic, desire that working together is better than fucking war. You know what I mean?
I'm confused about the born free. That's really vague to me, but I can accept that whole statement.
I agree with you. That is very vague.
Kind of a presupposition.
Yeah. Everyone is
it sort of abolishes slavery, I think.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it definitely could have been for that. Yeah.
Everyone is entitled to all rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Furthermore, no distinction should be made on the basis of political, jurisdictional, or international status of the country or territory which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing, or under any other limitation of sovereignty. Now, interestingly, we note this, there is no protection for political belief in the United States, civilly, in civil rights. I can say that, someone's opinions don't represent the company, and therefore politically they don't have to work with me. That is something that we don't have in the United States.
Alabama is a right to work state, which means they could just not like the way you look.
Article 3. Everyone has the right of liberty, life, and the security of person.
Life, liberty, and security.
Everybody has life, liberty, and security of property.
Sometimes
A person.
A comment about that little right to work state still doesn't mean that, like, if they explicitly told you that they didn't hire you because of what you look like, that still wouldn't be allowed, even if it is right to work.
I hope not. I hope you're correct. I live here is why I worry.
Okay, just so we don't get stuck on this, don't conflate right to work with employment at will.
No distinction should be made on the basis of political. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So let's move on, because that's kind of a non sequitur for this. I mean, it might be applicable later, but the right to work is
for sure. No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. I'm sure everyone here can agree with that.
Is this United Nations?
Yes, we're going through the UN.
Oh, well, Mace Starwalk is in a different voice chat, but Mace Starwalk doesn't agree with that one. So if he comes in here, he would definitely dispute the slavery one.
What would the argument
there's people
be?
There's people in here too that don't.
Well,
slavery. As described in Amendment 13 of the Constitution, he believes in slavery as punishment for a crime.
Aha.
Which is in the 13th Amendment. It says slavery shall not exist except as punishment for a crime.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So that, I mean, that's an exception, but in general, right?
So for everyone who's just joined in or people who just came in to listen, the goal of this discussion today is to not only discuss what are human rights, what are rights, why we have rights, and how could we possibly ground them philosophically, scientifically, however you want to talk about it. Where can we make, unless like either are they just conventional? Are they deducible? Are they empirical? That type of stuff. Article 5.
Also,
no one
shall be Dandan, quickly, I just want to encourage you guys to engage. If you want to text chat during this, please text chat on YouTube. youtube.com/Pangburn. We are live.
Yes, I'm looking at the chat. I'll be scrolling down every once in a while, but if people can help me because I'm reading something else, that would really help.
Yes, I'm on it. Oh, shit.
Okay. Everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. All are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration and against any incitement to such discrimination. Everyone has the right to an effective remedy by the competent national tribunals for acts violating fundamental rights granted to him by the Constitution or by law. No one shall be subjected to the arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. Everyone is entitled to full equality to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal in the determination of his rights and obligations and of any criminal charges against him. Everyone charged with a penal offense has the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty, according to law in a public trial at which he has all the guarantees necessary for his defense. No one shall be held guilty for any penal offense on account of any act or omission which did not constitute a penal offense under national or international law at a time when it was committed, nor shall a heavier penalty be imposed than the one that was applicable at the time of penal offense was committed. This is basically if you committed something illegal that was legal when you did it, you're not liable to be imprisoned.
Right.
No one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks. Everyone has the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. This right may not be invoked in case of persecutions genuinely arising from non-political crimes or from acts contrary to the purpose and principles of the United Nations. Everyone has the right to a nationality. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality, nor denied the right to change his nationality. Men and women of full age without any limitations due to race, nationality, or religion have the right to marry and to found a family. They are entitled to equal rights as to marriage, during marriage, and its dissolution. Marriage should be entered into only with the free and full consent of the intending spouses. The family is the natural and fundamental group unit of society. It is entitled to protection by society and the state. Everyone has the right to own property alone as well as in association with others. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his property. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in a community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. Everyone has the right to freedom of peacefully assemble an association. No one may be compelled to belong to an association. Everyone has the right to take part in the government of his country directly or through freely chosen representatives. Everyone has the right of equal access to public service in this country. The will of the people shall be the basis of authority of the government. This will shall be expressed in periodic and genuine elections, which shall, by universal and equal suffrage, and shall be by secret vote or by equivalent free voting procedures. Everyone, as a member of society, has the right to social security and is entitled to realization through national effort and international cooperation and in accordance with the organization and resources of each state of the economic, social, and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity and the free development of his personality. Anyone have any comments, anything they want to say so far?
I just wanted to know the context of frontiers in that last bit.
Over here?
Yeah.
Where is frontier? I don't see that. I don't see the word. Am I blind, guys?
Let me see.
I think I remember hearing it, but I couldn't tell you where.
Oh, over here. Regardless of frontiers, receive and impart information ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. So let's just quickly Google it just to make sure.
Frontiers. Mediums?
Right, I think it's mediums. Oh, an international border. You can, yeah, through borders. Okay.
I guess frontiers abstractly makes sense if they're talking about mediums.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to get the context on that. So I was like, wait, no, hold on, there's cowboys?
Yeah, that's
no, we're not.
That's kind of what I thought too.
The Great Frontier.
And yes, this does feel like a problem, but it's going to get more fun. It's going to get more spicy once we start talking about positive and negative rights.
None of these are like, disagreeable so far.
Right?
No, not at all.
But also, you haven't thought through each of them to their logical end and how that relates with the other ones.
We could take
whether any two or three of these rights in conjunction can sustain self-sustain without contradictions.
Yeah, you could take each one of them as a claim and then analyze them that way,
Right.
But
and there's more of them too, right?
I would say these aren't necessarily disagreeable, but I certainly think that there's more nuance that isn't covered.
Of course.
You know?
Always.
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways in which I could say, well, technically, in this situation, blah, blah, blah. So I think it'd be interesting to dive into those cases and where it applies.
Right, and we're already now getting into a bit of a spicy one, right? Everyone, as a member of society, has the right to social security, is entitled to realization through national effort and international cooperation in accordance with the organization and resources of each state of the economic, social, and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity, the free development of his personality. Everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and unfavorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment.
Yeah.
Everyone.
That's one people forget a lot, I think. The employment thing.
Yes.
The government has an obligation to provide you with a good stable market, and so that's what a lot of this globalization talk is about. Without being too nationalistic, it's like you're not providing a stable work environment for a lot of people, and people forget that the government, that's like actually a right.
Well, I think you could read it in a couple of different ways. One being that governments are obligated to provide a stable market and or to simply employ their citizens regardless of market conditions, essentially. Or you could say that they're hands off when it comes to employment. They're not going to impose laws to employment or the employment of others in any kind of legal way, But as far as market conditions go, it's neither here nor there. It's like if half the population is unemployed because of external reasons, then I don't know.
But
I could see the government
I could easily see the intent of that could have been when someone says everybody has the right to work. I could easily see the intent of that having been something different than what we're interpreting it as. So many people would say the right to work means that somebody else has the obligation to employ you, or to ensure your employment, or maybe the government, like the Federal Reserve's second mandate is to ensure maximum employment. And that's a fulfillment of the obligation of our government to ensure that everybody has to ensure everybody's right to work. But I think it could just as easily have meant originally that you're not allowed to, or that it would be immoral to deprive somebody of the ability to work, as in to make a rule that says you or you personally or a specific class of people are not allowed to work as a class. So that clause could either forbid a government from writing a law which forbids a class of people from working, i.e. Nazi Germany forbidding Jews from engaging in whatever business they were engaging in,
or like a minimum wage law.
Or a class of people who are only worth $5 an hour, and you write a minimum wage law that says that the minimum wage is $7 an hour, and so that essentially forbids practically worthless people from working for $5 an hour.
So if I hire a child and that child wants to work, are they can the government step in and say, no, you're not allowed to employ this child due to child labor laws?
That's a different issue. That's I would say that's a general, more broad issue about when someone's able to consent to something.
Okay, that's a fair argument.
Yeah,
I mean, technically, children have very limited rights unless underneath their parents. You know what I'm saying?
But even so, children that are 12 years old without parents are not forbidden by law to work, and employers are not forbidden by law to employ them.
I guess that depends on where you live.
So
where I live, it's only 14.
Emancipated minors and children of any age without parents are not forbidden from fending for themselves. So I guess the way you interpret that clause is it makes a big difference in terms of whether you think that.
So we definitely stumbled into something that is unknown to some people. I'm sure most people in this chat know it. But for people listening, there is a distinction that is made theoretically between what are called positive rights and negative rights.
Right.
Negative rights are the things that you cannot take away from someone, like free speech or like freedom of association or freedom of bodily autonomy. And positive rights are the ones that enable him to exercise those rights. So in order for me to fully exercise my right of self-preservation, I have to be educated. I have to know what is good for me, what is bad for me. I have to have a good education, which is why it is a right to be educated. which is why, let's say your parents don't give you a good education, the state can literally take you away from your parents to make sure you get education.
Right. So that would be a positive right.
That would be a positive right. In the United States, that's a positive right. And also in Europe, it's a positive right. Education, you have to be educated at least to 12th grade. No, at least to, I think, elementary school or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that positive right and negative right means what you think it means.
I was going to ask, does negative right mean intrinsic right?
Right. So there's like natural rights, as in if you were in the state of nature, these are rights that you would have had.
That's negative.
What you're doing right now,
negative rights.
Doodle, what you do? Now you're grounding the rights, right? You're no longer explaining them; you're grounding them, right?
No, well, I'm trying to explain it to people that don't understand the difference between positive and negative rights.
Yeah, and that's
from a different perspective than yours.
Yeah, but I think
nice webpage.
Wikipedia is the best webpage. What are you talking about?
So let's just say this: every right has a corresponding duty. Okay, so an individual has a right, and the people that he interacts with have a corresponding duty. A negative right is where the corresponding duty is to refrain from an action. So my right to life means that your duty is to refrain from killing me without due cause.
Mm-hmm.
Right? A positive right is one where the corresponding duty is an affirmative action. My right to healthcare means that you, a doctor, are obligated to provide me healthcare.
No, I don't think that's necessarily the case. It could be that the state can offer you healthcare.
The state,
but
whether it's the state paying for it or just the person standing next to you, there's no positive action required by the person standing next to me to guarantee my right to life. All he has to do is stand there and not kill me. And my right to life has been therefore guaranteed. That's a negative right.
Yes,
but the right to health care, there's somebody somewhere has to do something to afford me that right.
So we can just look at, for example, education, the right to education. If there are no teachers, it doesn't mean
that's a positive right. Somebody has to teach.
But no one's going to be forced to be a teacher also if there were no teachers. That would conflict with their negative rights. Positive rights are not this right, so it's a little fuzzy. We'll get into it.
But it's a positive right in that the government is responsible for guaranteeing that there are enough teachers for everybody.
Yes. A lot of times people look at positive rights as necessary conditions for your negative rights, that without these positive rights, your negative rights could not be fulfilled.
Yeah. That's an interesting way to interlink them, but that's not what it means.
No, I'm saying a lot of people look at it that way, but it basically means a positive right is a right that you're owed, and a negative right is one that
you're owed through a contract, social or legal,
or whatever it might be.
So the controversy here is just the group right to inflict a demand on the individual right.
I don't think it's that simple, but I think the simple way to look at it, a positive right, are things like education, things like water, things like mail, like in the United States and the Constitution of mail and roads.
Yeah.
And negative rights are things like freedom of speech, what we usually classically know as rights in the United States.
Right.
Okay. Right.
Example,
those are examples.
Guns is a positive right, but owning guns is a
self-defense. Self-defense is a negative right, and guns is a positive right.
Exactly, which is why
I got you.
In the amendment it says for the enshrinement of my rights, I get guns. Right, guns are necessary for me to have my negative rights.
Right. So positive rights can in some cases enforce negative rights. That's what you
generally they do, but not always.
Right.
But sometimes positive rights can be just conceptualized and put into a contract. So
they can. But generally,
like if I have a contract between me and you for a good or service to provide a good or service in perpetuity for a given price, then you have a positive right to the good. I have a positive right to your money. There's no negative rights involved in that contract.
Right.
But those would both be positive rights because the obligation of the counterparty is it actually involves an action.
Yeah, you're just speaking ethically, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I got you.
Okay.
Everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work. Everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for himself and his family an existence worthy of human dignity and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection. Everyone has the right to form and join trade unions for the protection of their interests, his or her interests. Everyone has the right to rest and leisure, including reasonable limitations of working hours and periodic holidays with pay. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself, of his family, including food, clothing.
Can we
housing.
hold on a
Yeah.
second? Before you go too far, I wanted to stop and point out, for those of us who don't have adequate space in our short-term memory to remember the rights that have already been read, one of the rights not too long ago was that everybody has the right to work.
Okay.
And then the one that was just said just now is that everybody has the right to form a trade union in order to protect their whatever it is the trade unions protect.
Yeah.
Their interests.
But does everybody remember that everyone has the right to work?
Yes.
And is it not true that the presence of a trade union in an area or in a contract with an employer prevents people from working unless they belong to that trade union?
So maybe we can look at that one as a negative right?
Well, I'm just.
Well, I
I'm
mean,
just,
yeah,
I'm
well, I
just,
mean,
I'm
all
just
it- all-
pointing
all it
out
takes-
that all of these standing alone sound great, and
Well,
when you start thinking about what happens when you start implementing them, then there's going to be trade-offs.
Well, all it takes for you to get that job, then, if you want the right to work that job, is to join that trade union.
Yeah, I mean,
that's. I mean, to find a way to get in. If you want that job, you've got the right to get employed to it. If you work for the trade union, go do that. You can still.
No, the right to work as it's implemented in our current legal structure, it literally implies the right of the employee to not join a trade union or for
you don't have
trade
to.
unions to not be enforced whatsoever.
right. Yeah, you don't have to.
There's nothing telling you have to join a trade union. If you want a job that requires a trade union, you have the right to get it by joining that trade union. If you don't, then you don't.
And a trade union in itself will never prevent another person from getting the job, right? I mean, it's just
no, not at all. That's not at all how things actually work out in the real world.
Right.
In the real world, if there's a trade union that has influence in a geographical area, they will in fact prevent people who are not in the trade union from getting jobs. And there's a lot of people that can work and can do it better and are coming from a different geographical location who will be prevented from working in a particular geographical location by said trade union.
And that's what a right to work state means, is that you can work in a state that has a trade union, and so they can't keep you out, right?
I think let's not get too bogged down on the specifics right now, because we're going to be using these and coming back to them with examples once we go through all the different categories of
sounds good
rights, right?
But just as a pausing point, there's
Absolutely.
one example of something we can talk about later. Okay,
Right,
let's move on.
definitely talking about unions and all that stuff. Exactly.
Yeah.
Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, and other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. Motherhood and childhood are entitled to special care and assistance. All children, whether born in or out of wedlock, shall enjoy the same social protections. Everyone has the right to education. Education should be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. Technical and professional education should be made generally available, and higher education should be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. Education should be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding.
Hold on.
Yep.
I'm sorry. Can you finish that paragraph and I'm going to interrupt you.
It shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial or religious groups, and shall further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace.
So that paragraph had some shoulds in it, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I think it had some shoulds.
It absolutely
Some
had
odds.
shoulds.
Some odds,
So
yeah.
rights are. I mean, this is one of the things that kind of bugs me.
Right.
Rights are shalls.
Yeah, you have permission.
In my opinion,
You're like allowed. Yeah.
You're not allowed to do this because it infringes on someone else's right. You shall not murder.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
It's not obligatory.
You should create a structure that allows people to get education.
Right.
How is that so then what it's a should it's a statement of preference. It's somebody's preference, it's not necessarily yours.
I think looking at this through the lens of like lawyering right now and specific wording, we're gonna get into a lot of problems. Because
I think should and shall are that's not lawyering.
Yeah, it's like is and ought. It's to be noticed. It's a nuance.
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot of weird shoulds in this when we're starting to declare rights, right?
So, we're talking more positive rights. So education should be directed the full development of the human personality.
Right. So we can scratch out anything with a should statement and say that's not a right. That's the opinion of the writer.
Well, okay, that's one way of thinking about it. But another way of thinking about it is that rights are not like written in the fabric of reality. What rights are is a set of preferences. You know? It's a set of preferences that we've all kind of roughly agreed on.
It's in our minds.
Idea. Yeah, I mean, it's just words on paper. We don't have to follow any of it.
It's kind of an agreed upon axiomatic choice of society, basically, at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So it's just because like a majority of people like agree doesn't mean that it's just like one person's preference over another person's preference, and we just shouldn't consider it on the same playing field. It's like they're all preferences.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think there's a strong version of rights and there's a weak version of rights, and the shoulds are
the weak.
Well, I'll put it this way: there's every country that says that they adhere to this set of standards. They don't do it very well, or they do it selectively, and they treat them as preferences either way. So I really think like functionally it almost doesn't make a difference. I mean, you want the wording to be strong, but like I get what you're saying there, but I wouldn't make a categorical distinction.
A distinction without a difference, I reckon.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
And this is where we're going to try to define like what these rights are more specifically. So it's great that we're getting all these questions. It's phenomenal, but we're really just at the end, and then we can get into the nice meat and business where we can start disagreeing each other and calling each other idiots.
We're all
none of
idiots.
that. Yeah, we're all dummies.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. Everyone has the right freely to participate in the life of the community, to enjoy the arts, and scientific advancement and its benefits. Everyone has the right to the protection of the moral and material interests resulting from any scientific, literary, or artistic production of which he is the author. Everyone is entitled to a social and international order, which the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration can be fully realized. Everyone has duties to the community in which alone the free and full development of his personality is possible. In the exercise of his rights and freedoms, everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as are determined by law solely for the purpose of securing, due to recognition and respect, for the rights and freedoms of others and of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order, and the general welfare in a democratic society. These rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. Nothing in this declaration may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person the right to engage in an activity or to perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms set forth herein. And I think this last article hits on something very important about rights. That rights cannot negate one another. What do we think about that?
Just thinking.
They tend to look like they're working in a way that's more in tandem, like because of the positive and negative parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't seem, So I would see that it's. I'm sure that there's a very like wordy contradiction somewhere in there that exists, but as it is, just looking at it straight on, no. It's positive and negative. It's kind of make it seem like because they exist, it's really hard for another right to overtake another right because we've got explanations for why certain things can happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that Article 30 is like the fail-safe, It's saying no infringement upon any of the rights.
Right.
No right.
And that's like, all right. And at the end of it, nobody can fuck with this. Sign.
Yeah.
So, but before the Universal Declaration of Rights started, there was like a preamble that says that everybody has to respect it. Was that a thing? Or
Yeah.
am I just misremembering?
There was a preamble where it says, whereas disregard and contempt from human rights have resulted, it telling you why they're doing it, basically. Because without human rights, it's negative.
Quote unquote evidence. Gotcha.
Yeah, the quote unquote reasoning.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
So now let's get into something a little more fun. How do we ground these rights? Where do they come from?
Yeah.
Doolittle, you were saying about inalienable, right? Like the American way of looking at rights, right? How do you describe that?
Inalienable rights?
Yeah, the
so
way that you.
I think the American view of it, from my perspective, is let's just say there's a principle of what I would call like a foundational principle in my morality is self-ownership, and you have the right to life and the right to self-defense and the right to property. And the right to pursue your own happiness those are all corollaries to self-ownership.
Okay.
All right.
So the natural rights are sort of the grounding of American the rights that you would have seen in, let's just say, the Declaration of Independence.
Okay.
And that's basically if you were in a state of nature without having to interact with other people, what rights would you have? Like, how would you govern yourself in accordance with the world around you? And that results.
Can we take other people out of the equation though? I mean, because the
idea is take other people out of the equation, and how would you exist? And then throw some other people in the equation. And and then once you throw those other people in the equation, what things are you not allowed to do now that there's other people?
Gotcha. So basically, like the veil of ignorance, build a society to where everyone has infinite rights, and then you limit things based on what will affect other people in harmful ways, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So I think that's objectively, the things that I would say are objective morality are the ones that the actions that sustain natural rights are objectively moral, or the set of actions that don't impede on natural rights.
I hear you.
Are objectively moral. So
are any of them intrinsic though?
Intrinsic to what?
Like existence. Are any of the positive or negative or shall rights that you were talking about, are any of those intrinsic to humanity?
I'm not sure what you mean by intrinsic.
Yeah, it's a hard to define word. Inherent essence, like it's absolutely, that's hard to describe. I'll have to look that one up. Yeah, I guess maybe you could say it that way.
Well, from what I understand as inalienable rights, or like natural rights, quote unquote, or the rights that we have in a quote unquote state of nature, that even if we are in any form of government or society that infringes on these rights, it's just tyranny at that point, because you kind of just have them. That is, like freedom of speech, freedom of association.
Oh, here we go.
Right, these are the ones we're talking about. The ones that are in direct contradiction. There's no way to remove them from the person. That's what we mean by intrinsic. They exist as a part of what it means to be a person.
Yeah.
Well, you can remove life from a person. Don't get me wrong. You could do that. It's possible. But I don't think there's anybody that would argue that it's inherently or even close to universally moral to remove life from a person.
Well, isn't that self-contradictory, right? If the person, in order to have rights, they must be alive. So to remove it removes their rights.
Yeah.
By virtue of being alive, you have the right of life.
It's not contradictory. That's not contradictory. By virtue of being alive, you have the right to life.
That's why I was asking about intrinsic rights, like the fact of being alive. Is that an intrinsic right to humanity to be alive?
I think by virtue of being a moral agent, you have the right to life.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of things that are alive that are not, that don't have agency.
Well, humans. We're talking about human rights, right?
If we're talking about the way that humans just exist on the planet, like how deer exist or how like chinchillas exist or whatever, there are technically no rights.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at Native Americans back, when there was no government, none of all this stuff was meaningless. So I kind of agree with what you just said.
They had governments, and I wouldn't say that. I mean, they have like moral systems and law, but anyways, not really. Like neither here nor there, but I think kind of what you guys are hinting at is if I come on the scene and there's no one around, do I have rights, or do rights need to be imbued by society or an authority or whatever it is in some way?
Well, it depends on your situation. If you're born in a jungle somewhere, you probably, and there's no government or anyone to protect you, you probably don't have any rights, because things are just going to come by and do whatever the fuck they want. And there's nothing that's going to be able to save you. And the right for you to live universally doesn't exist when a tiger's hungry.
Right. So what you're implying there when you say that is that the rights only really come into play when another moral agent comes in and decides to not do that to you, right?
Or when both moral agents, or when both people agree on one, yeah.
That's what I was asking about intrinsic value.
If someone doesn't agree with me on human rights, I can say, well, because all of us believe in human rights, I'm going to uphold this person's rights, and they don't have to agree or anything. They can just exist. It doesn't really matter as long as they're not violating them. We won't do anything to them.
Yeah, but when people say like humanity's intrinsic rights, that just that doesn't. Yeah. There are none, not intrinsically.
That's what I was talking about when I said it. It's because the concept of intrinsic value has been characterized a lot over different ways, but it's basically for its own sake and not for something else's. Presuppositionally intrinsic. So does it have meaning without the Go ahead. I'm sorry. You get it.
Yeah, totally. I kind of see where you're coming from. I was just trying to get at, okay, so if it's not intrinsic, like where does it come from?
Right.
And what I was kind of offering up is the idea that it is imbued upon the individual by society.
Okay.
Yeah,
because there's nothing else to give you the rights.
Right.
If you finally have a group of people that have come together and they've decided that some shit's good and some shit's bad, it's a good thing that you found or you live in that group of people that have decided that, because if you live outside that group and that doesn't exist anywhere else, you don't have any fucking rights.
Even if you live in the middle of the desert and are separated from other people, you're still not separated from the effects of other people. You know, you can't be completely separated in a socio-political view from unless you leave the planet, which, you know, hey. But
Right.
it's all based in group, you know,
How
what the
about this
group
question?
thinks is worth something.
Are human
this
rights
is maybe-
universal? Do they apply to all humans everywhere, no matter what? Are they absolute? Should we consider them absolute?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was asking too.
So
Okay.
in the context of the society creating them for people, or just the considered universal human
Yeah,
rights?
I think that's the
Their
question
value.
right there.
Yeah.
I think to the extent that the entity you're applying them to is a moral agent, then yes, you should apply them.
I think
So nihilists don't have rights.
So that's an ought statement.
You say
right?
nihilists
What-
don't have rights.
And what we're asking is an is statement, I think. Because what
We're
you're
all
saying is we should
qualifying right
consider
now.
them.
We're not quantifying. We're in the qualification of
Well,
talking about
We're
values.
still qualifying it.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is, like, as soon as you say, well, we should consider them, you know, to be protected by these human rights, it's like that's an ought statement. But I think the question is actually an is statement. Like, are these rights universal, like, objectively? And
Should
I
they
think,
be?
and then there's the follow up question, which is should they be, whether or not they are. But that
this kind of
implies. Well, I was just going to say that the idea that we can ask like a should question about it implies that it's not objective. It's not objectively universal, but to the extent that we can call it universal, it's only because we all tend to agree that those rights apply universally. But that is
Well,
that is
how about within the
collective
concept
preference.
of rights? What if we just look at this from an analytic perspective? Can we define human rights without the universality? Would they cease to be human rights if they're defined non-universally? Would they no longer be human rights?
No, I mean, if you
It would
have
be a
child-
particular group's rights. It'd be whoever had them.
So could we
Right.
call them? So should we? So can we consider that? Isn't the group we're talking about right now humans?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So if the group is human, are the rights for humans universal?
Yeah. Are they absolute?
Yes.
Okay, that's I would go into a should statement. I think they should be, but I don't. I would say that they're not.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm with you there. I think they should be, and I think the objective subjective is just kind of missed. It's kind of it's very difficult to quantify, you know. And this is ought kind of thing is another kind of, you know, paradox. It's kind of like Zenu's paradox.
Yes,
you know, you get
yes.
third, and, you know,
Infinite regresses.
yes, and ultimately, you know, the problem with the objectivity is it ultimately is coming from an objective source. So we could talk about objectivity till we're blue in the face, but I'm with you. You know, I think at some point it has to be an axiomatic claim, and the axiomatic claim can't be self-substantiated by the axiom itself. So is health good?
Yeah.
So is health good?
Yeah.
We all agree on that. But, you know, what in medicine proves health's good? You know, I mean, you know, does
The age-old argument of well-being, like, you know, Sam Harris talks about all the time with well-being. How do you define that?
Right, and it's like a loose term, like he uses sport, but that's kind of, you know, my general view on it is, yeah, you know, the should and should it. That's all very interesting, but like you
So
said,
you're saying moral situationalism, basically, not moral relativism necessarily, but each situation being its specific moral answers in each one.
Well, what is the difference in morals, right, and moral rights from human rights? Where do they differ, and in what ways do they differ?
Well,
I guess
think you have
morals.
to-
It's actually kind of to me it's kind of this. It's actually kind of rolls on the same thing. The only thing, except the difference is that the governance that gives you your morals is yourself at the end of the day. So You decide whether or not you live up to your moral code.
Democratic system.
Well, society's moral codes. I think most people would say like,
Oh,
yeah,
I'm talking about a person-to-person basis.
yeah,
I'm just talking
totally.
about one singular.
Yeah, and well, yeah,
I think-
there's no like superstructure necessarily to kind of measure your own morality against. I think is the key difference, because once you have a declaration of it, it's the declaration that gives it like any kind of weight in people's minds, and more importantly, the agreement to that declaration. But
a declaration
words
from
on the
who?
paper.
What creates? See, so now this takes us to another place. What or who declares, right, these declarations? For example, it used to be monarchs or kings, right? Now it's countries. So should human rights be defined in some type of in view through the lens of political function rather than some sort of naturalistic function, some sort of inalienable function? Should we look at them through a political lens?
Good question.
No.
There's
I'd say pragmatically, yeah.
Say no.
Yeah, with utilitarianism, it's definitely gone that way, I'd say.
Well, I'd say that
yeah,
since we're calling them human rights and not contractual rights or American rights, or we're trying to broaden the definition of what what personhood is to all human beings. We recognize that we're the same species, and we have the same potential, regardless of where we are geographically or in space and time, or with respect to the political structure that happens to dominate the territory that we live in. And so calling them human rights, essentially, the point of that, instead of calling them something else, is that it extends our let's just say empathy to all human beings throughout space and time, and say we can make that irrespective of the political situation that any
separate
given
it
being finds themselves in. And so absolutely not. It shouldn't be politically couched in any way, shape, or form.
We shouldn't see it as a function of political organization.
Right.
Because humans from now until infinity are going to have changing political organizations, and calling it a human right. Right. You know, it's not a Democrat right. It's not a Republican right. It's not a socialist right. It's not a communist right. It's not a capitalist right. It's all humans.
Right.
Well,
because rights exist in the minds of humans.
To push back against that a little bit, can't we say that rights need to exist in the mind of humans for democratic political entities to function?
Yeah,
and they are somehow contingent upon that existence, that those systems.
I think all socio-systems are connected to me, but
yeah, I think in practice it's true, but maybe not in theory. I don't know. I think there's a distinction to be made there.
Turned up on my OBS. There we go. Another wrench to throw in this is, what do you think the United Nations statements on crimes against humanity are?
You're asking like what do we think they are? Or?
Yeah, what do you think those are? Like, are they the early stages of a globally accepted moral standard?
See, I think they're like a moral.
Hey guys, when you're not talking, please mute, because we're getting all kinds of noise. Thanks.
Okay, I server muted Sue a little bit. And, I'll wait till he gets back.
Yeah.
What was I gonna say? I think it's almost a moral prescription onto like countries, like collective entities, because I don't think the Geneva Convention would be called upon if like a single individual went about trying to commit a war crime. They would just be tried by their country. So it's almost like the UN recognizes countries as their own autonomous entities.
But it's quite a feat, right? When apes have gotten to a point where they can collectively come to a place and vote as a united group of nations on what would be considered a crime against humanity. Like, this is a global human statement on rights.
Yeah.
For all the developed Western nations.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And I mean, I think something to add here would be that to point, where this came from. I mean, this came directly out of the misery of the 2 world wars. Correct. So, it's not like they didn't know what the hell they were talking about. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, so.
Yeah. So when you guys were looking for precedent as to like, where are these things coming from? What are some things we can look to some moments through history where people want to look around and say, how could we let this happen? Well, perhaps we didn't have a structure in order to, or perhaps we didn't have a mechanism to keep track of this stuff and to keep tabs on things. And of course, I think it kind of created this new idea that you have to constantly be checking in with what others are doing around the planet from kind of a moralistic rights perspective, which is kind of a new idea. It used to be like, you manage your country, we'll manage ours, we'll do some trade, but then you get this, this united thought of what people's, human beings' rights should be, and if they you have,
it stems from humanism.
And if you can have what you can call a crime against humanity or crimes against humanity, mass slaughtering of your citizens or something like that, the rest of the people of the world say they should have the right not to be slaughtered or not to be, tested upon.
Global moral consensus.
Right. Well, I think it's the early stages of trying to get everyone on board, and I actually think it's good for the moral foundation of the world, if you want to call it that.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's not a coincidence that countries that are hostile, let's say North Korea, to the UN are, I'll go back to the word objective, are objectively less desirable than places that are, open to dealing with the UN. And another point is, there's something very powerful in writing things in words, and we can parse them bureaucratically, and that's all cool. But there's something about writing things in stone, and we can get back to the 10 Commandments or whatever. But that was, if you look back at that was an earlier attempt at this, a much
reality,
a much smaller one. But one more thing I will say is, I think that we could possibly agree that we would like to spread this code that we have, is maybe is not as good as it could be, to every possible place that doesn't necessarily embrace these rights, and we would consider that objectively good if the other places did accept it.
Mm.
So when we look at the United States Declaration, right, it grounds these rights by appealing to God, by saying that they're given by supreme lawmaker, right, enacted these basic human rights. And I think it's important to recognize that when we're going to delve into this topic, we're going to hit perspectivism, where maybe not each of the grounding themselves is by itself sufficient to the grounding of human rights, but rather the interplay of most of them make it,
a balance of interplay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, for example, what's the issue with grounding it with God, right? Many religions, as someone in the chat is saying, beautifully said, right? Some people use their God to violate what we would consider human rights, to violate and to harm other people.
Yeah, our morals evolve.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way, like I hear people from time to time trying to make a moral system based on evolution, and then there's other people like Nazis or whatever that will try to use that same sort of logic to justify terrible atrocities.
Yeah, survival of the fittest. Chop off your head. You're 5 foot. 5'3". Fuck you. Something like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, okay. Oh no, sorry. I was about to be like, well, I mean, like, he could totally pick out jobs for short people. I mean, I'm sure there's something they do a little bit better.
Yeah, for sure.
God
for
damn
sure.
it.
But yeah, so yeah, there's an interplay between freedom of religion and then freedom from, persecution of a religion or by a religion.
Yeah. Look at the Westboro Baptist Church.
Yeah,
That's where active.
Jesus.
So one of the interesting human rights that the UN Declaration writes about is the right to belong to a state.
Yeah, I saw that.
Right, the right to belong to a state.
The right to have a nationality.
The right to have a nationality. So let's take that and let's look at DACA recipients in the United States. People who came here before the age of 10 have no connection to their home country and cannot participate civilly in this country where they went to school with, their primary language and their primary residence. Would we consider that a violation of human rights?
One more time? I for some reason I didn't quite.
The DACA program for all the kids who are over here. That
so let's say the people come in here illegally, their parents came over the border with them.
Do you mean lack of DACA?
And no, those same ones, they don't have DACA. They don't have DACA anywhere. But even if they have DACA, right, they cannot vote. They cannot participate in the economy. They cannot be represented. They pay taxes. They go to school. They drive on our roads. They live here from X of 20 years. Can we consider that a violation of human rights on the United States part?
Well, if that was true, then yeah.
Yeah,
that is true, right?
It's not true.
Yeah,
I didn't know.
DACA recipients can vote.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
not all of them. School. They can go to school.
Not all of them.
Not all of them.
They can work in our country.
I said, but not all of them.
And they all have their own nation. Their own nation is Guatemala or wherever they came from, and they can vote there, and they can go back there and vote there if they want to.
Are they allowed to change their nationality?
I mean, can you address what Dada is saying though? Like, not all of them, at least, like.
I don't know. I think the DACA thing is a straw man. You have the right to a nation, not the right to someone else's nation.
What if they were born here, though?
Yeah,
they weren't. Well, the thing about being DACA is none of them were born here. Everyone that's born here is a citizen of the United States of America.
Okay, I think there's some confusion over what DACA actually is.
Yeah, actually, if we could get like a baseline.
So people who have DACA, I'm on the US government website right now. They have a green card. You cannot. It's equivalent of a green card. You cannot vote with a green. They cannot. You can
vote. Yeah. You can vote in local elections, just not in federal elections.
No, I have a green card and I cannot vote in local elections either. That is not true. I'm not a U.S. citizen, by the way.
No way! I did not know that. Where are you from?
Israel.
Yeah.
Oh no shit. Okay, cool. I didn't know that. Cool.
I didn't know that DACA. So it gives you some rights, but not all rights. I thought it just gave you full American rights, full stop.
Seems like it's just green card.
I mean, I'm gonna go ahead and answer. Yeah, I'm gonna answer the question and say, yeah. I mean, that seems like that's problematic at the least.
Yeah.
But are the DACA recipients stripped of their right to vote in the country that they were born in?
Yes, because they're non-residents there. For example,
that's true.
That depends on
which country too.
Yeah,
depends on which country.
So in Europe, you have many Turkish people, and even though they're not born there, they can still vote for Turkey, for the Turkish president. And there are some other countries, I believe Morocco as well, which is a fun thing. Apparently, there was a man in the Netherlands who found out that his great-great-grandfather came from Morocco, and they automatically gave him a Moroccan passport, which also made him eligible to vote. So that it completely depends on what country you're from.
Cultural.
Should the right to vote be a human right?
Yes.
The right to vote where?
In the country that you reside in.
No.
So, the United Nations human right, one of the previous ones, is that everyone has the right to their own nation.
I know, but they also have the right to switch.
And there's another. So if you have a right to your own nation, and somebody else has a right to switch their nation to yours, do you have a right to a nation?
Sure.
Yeah. Them switching to your nation doesn't take your nation away, right?
Sure does. A nation is a group of people that have similar values.
Well, you can have dual citizenship, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about citizenship. I'm talking about the freedom to associate with people that have the same values as you.
Well, the freedom to associate in general. But we're talking specifically with the right to vote in a nation that you reside in, right? So, for example, you say, "Oh,
but you have the right. You have the right to. You have the right to
the nation.
You have the right to asylum in another nation, and then you have the right to vote in the nation that you reside in. And the people that live in that nation have the right to their own nation. But the people that took asylum in their nation are voting against them in their own nation.
Right, but let's
those rights supersede the right to democracy.
Let's focus in on DACA recipients specifically, or people of that scenario. Right, you come here, age 9, your parents came illegally, you overstayed a visa. Now they're working off the books. You went to elementary school, you went to high school in the United States, you started going to college, and well, you're not a U.S. citizen, nor can you apply to become a U.S. citizen. Why is that person considered any more or less of a U.S. citizen than you? Other than them just being born here, since that's extremely arbitrary. What if they came here when they were 1 year old, but they didn't do it through a legal process? Should they not be considered a citizen, and should they not be represented in the environment they live in?
It doesn't sound arbitrary to me. There's a process, and if you fail to follow the process, then it's not. That's not arbitrary. There's no way you can call that arbitrary.
We're not talking about regular immigration. This is very important. The whole point of DACA is they were against their will. They were in their mother's womb. You know what I mean? So those are kind of separate issues of mine.
Right. What if so for example, I have a friend whose father's a diplomat who was on he works at the UN, and he was born in the United States, but since his father was a diplomat, he didn't get citizenship. He never
because we don't have jurisdiction over that person.
Yeah, but he never
that
grew
was
up,
previously defined in law. It's not arbitrary.
He never grew up in the United States, right? He never grew up in Trinidad, his country of home origin, right? He lived in the States, in New York, moved to Florida, came back to New York for school, now he's in Florida again. For that person to not have citizenship and to not have rights as everyone else until he's like 28 when he had to apply them, does that not seem arbitrary to you? That we're deciding birth as an indicator? Like, why do we decide birth? What is our measurement? What is our objective reasoning to decide, oh, you're born here, you're therefore a citizen and you can live and vote? Why can't it be, oh, you've been living here for 15 years. You have no criminal record. Why isn't that our category for citizenship?
But certainly an infinite number of possibilities of categories for citizenship.
Which is why I said it's arbitrary, right?
Yeah.
For something to not be arbitrary, we have to be able to ground it in something.
It's not. Well, it's not arbitrary.
Okay, so let's ground it. Let's ground birth as a reasonable measure for citizenship.
Well, geographic. Just because, like the anarchy, the whole idea with anarchy is, free association, and just because you're born somewhere, you don't have to be under the laws of that place. But I think that is a fraught. That opens itself up to problems. But the easiest way to do it is, if you're born in the state of Georgia, you're upholding to the state of Georgia, and you have the rights that the state affords you. Now, if you're somebody that's from another country, the right to what is it? Nationalism? Right to a nation, basically?
Yeah.
Okay, so, if you're not in the country of your origin, and then you're in the United States, and, you're paying taxes and all this other stuff, but you got half the rights, geography seems to be at least one of the deciding factors of who gets the rights, just pragmatic purposes.
And it makes sense for geography to be an important factor, because why would somebody that was born? So as I say, most people don't go 25 miles from where they're born.
Yeah.
Right.
So
very often, yeah.
Yeah, very often. I would say 80% of people don't go 25 miles from where they were born. And so therefore, where you're born is most likely in very many cases, and I would say probably, I don't know what the exact statistics is. It's an is question, but most people are going to grow up, they're going to be born, they're going to grow up, they're going to live there, they're going to vote where they're born. And the people that migrate are an exception. They're an exception to the rule. They're not the rule.
So let's look at it this way. I say I was born in Germany. I was born there. I'm 1 years old. My parents moved to the States, and I'm living in the States my whole life. I'm 35 now. I barely speak German, but yet I have the right to vote in Germany.
Right.
Does birth here make any sense, or should I be considered a U.S. citizen?
Does birth here?
Wait,
in this scenario, right? Is
like I said, it's going to capture birth here is going to capture 80% of the people that should be U.S. citizens. Like, no doubt, way more than 80%.
Well, then shouldn't we just scratch that metric and go with people who've been living here for a certain period of time, rather than just birth? Yeah, you're born here, you get it, but that's not the primary metric. That's a tertiary one. It's a quick heuristic to figure it out. But if you don't live in the States, right? So that's what I'm saying. Maybe birth isn't how we should look at nationality. Maybe that's just a vestige of like our old pre-World War I nationalistic roots.
Let's try to negate our biases as best we can.
I'd say geography has to be one of the main playing factors. I'm sticking to that.
Well, okay, so I just want to jump in here a little bit, because I think there's a couple of assumptions that, or maybe not assumptions, but things that aren't being really fully fleshed out. One is like this idea that someone can come into a country and vote a particular way, and that would constitute voting against native-born citizens in some way. It's like I think that's a kind of fallacy, especially since, like, at least in America, people vote in all kinds of different ways, and they vote against each other all the time. Like,
Having trouble hearing you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Because you're driving.
No, sorry. I just went outside for a sec.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Cool. So what I was trying to say is, like, if you think about it, like, there's really no such thing as like voting against a person as like a categorical thing because you're not native born or whatever status you happen to be. It's like people, like the natural state of democratic politics is people voting against each other. That's what happens.
Right.
And the other thing is, actually, two more things. One, the first stems from that. It's this idea of like, why are we voting anyway? It's because, like, if you live here and you work here and you have like a family here, then you have a stake in the system in which you live, right? Like, it is in your interest to affect politics in a way that like supports you in some way, just like everyone else, right? That's what we all do. And so that's why anyone votes. So I would argue that, like, if you live in a particular place for a long enough period of time, you could justifiably say, like, this person obviously has a vested interest in the people, the culture, the land, like the politics of the place that they live in. And so that's something to keep in mind. The other thing is, I don't think anyone has a right to like preservation of culture. I think that's a silly argument. Culture changes all the time, and many times for good reasons. And sometimes when you blend cultures, you end up with something really cool. So, I I really would hesitate to say that like people influencing your culture from the outside is in any way a negative thing at all. If anything, I would say it gives people perspective. So I don't even consider that to be an argument for or against or whatever. It's just
I agree with you about that.
Culture has nothing to do with that.
That's a nice sentiment.
So that's kind of where I stand on a lot of that stuff. I just wanted to throw that out there because I think a lot of those arguments are just kind of getting taken for granted. So.
Well, I didn't hear anybody make a cultural argument, to be fair.
Someone had mentioned like people coming in and the basis on which someone might be called a citizen is like, well,
I think best. We're having a serious problem hearing you.
Yeah, I'm kind of losing it. Yeah.
You might want to either enable the noise reduction in the settings of your Discord on your phone if you're using a mobile version. There should be an option called crisp, which might really help the situation.
Or turn off your sawmill.
Sorry about that.
That is okay.
I think I've basically made my point. So go on.
I liked some of that.
Yeah. So
I've been gone for a second. I apologize.
That's all right. Let's move on to something a little more hairy.
All right.
Let's go to the right to healthcare. Why should we consider the right to healthcare as a positive right, which can help and enshrine our negative rights?
Well, if we go off of well-being, I mean, people being healthy to be able to make other people healthy, to be able to make other people healthy, or well, or feel better, or be able to affect people positively would just be an overall positive trait.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, an argument for it, would be, I mean, the first thing is right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I mean, this is going from American politics, but right to life's the first thing. So, that's a negative right if I'm getting it correct.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's an argument for it. If I fall down and break my leg, and I don't really have much liberty or pursuit of happiness if I don't have a right, to a negative right. I mean, a positive or negative right, whatever the hell it is. If I don't have a right to a doctor, then there's a saying: if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. So, that's where I go with it. On that side of the coin.
Personally, yeah, I think it should be considered an absolute positive right. I think that as society develops and technology moves forward, we are beginning to be compelled to, in a sense, provide for one another in ways that we can. Just like, in the advent of Adam Smith, we started looking at roadways and mail systems as rights, and we added on to that education. We can definitely add on to that healthcare. I absolutely believe that healthcare should be considered a positive human right.
If I didn't have, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I think, how we look back 300-400 years ago and we say, oh, they were doing this, the Crusades, or they were, burning heretics alive. I think 200 years from now, people are going to look back and say, they didn't have healthcare as a right. What the fuck were they doing? I'm sorry, I don't know if you can say much on here, but what the heck? What you know what I mean? Like what kind of backward people were they? Like we look at slavery and all that. So, but I do see other compelling arguments, for why it does get hairy in the details. But that's my argument, for it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the argument against it is just economical, in that if you have a categorical right that everyone is entitled to, let's just say, an infinite amount of health care to argue for the reductio ad absurdum.
Right.
Everybody is going to get to the stage of their life where they need more and more health care to survive. And at some point, the cost of providing that health care is not worth the benefit of providing that health care. So we can keep people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg alive till they're 155 years old, which I think we did in her case. The cost, there's all kinds of societal costs. One of them is that, fresh young minds don't come and replace the people that are in a certain job. One of the costs is there's somebody that could have been doing something else other than providing you healthcare. And if the other thing that they could have been doing gives more life and more health and more vitality to our society and to individuals and more well-being, then it would be bad to provide the next incremental unit of healthcare to somebody who gets no utility, to somebody that gets no good out of it.
So Randolph Richardson from the chat saying that you're wrong, that in Canada the cost isn't as high as it's making out to be. And there's some studies showing
I didn't
that
say anything about Canada, so Randolph is
what I'm saying
that I'm wrong about a claim that I didn't make.
Yeah. But I think what he's trying to get at is that the making it universal might even lower the price, as we can see that the US per capita spends a lot more on health insurance on health than other countries. Even we already pay so much more than proportionally to how other nations do.
But even Canada doesn't have universal health care in that you don't get an infinite amount of health care to the extent that you desire.
Mm-hmm.
You have an amount of health care that's rationed by some decision maker that's not you or your doctor.
So, Dr. Doodle, between let's say you look at the financial cost, do you think that if a case can be made, hey, okay, we can't outright make free healthcare, how about we make some subsidized healthcare? Do we have it in the budget and in the interest of our nation to give as much as we can towards trying to make that right more of a reality?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's absolutely of our interest to give more people more healthcare. But it's an incremental decision. It's not a categorical decision. Everybody gets the categorical decision is that everybody gets all the health care that they want. Right? One of the things in the preamble is that one of the things in the preamble to the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights is that they're striving to create a world that's free from want. And
free from want.
Yeah, that's what they said.
Good luck.
So if you want more health care, then it's your right. So if you start with the preamble, free from want, and then you say universal health care or health care is a right. Therefore, if you want more, you should get it. And the thing is that human desires are infinite, and resources to provide for those human desires are always going to be finite. So
I don't think it says free. I don't think that people should be. I think I'm looking at it right now in the preamble. It says their freedom. So it says they should live in a world where they enjoy freedom of speech, of belief, freedom from fear and want.
Freedom from fear and want. Okay, so thank you. You just made my point. So they have freedom from want. So if somebody wants more health care, and
they're never free of the want.
Then somebody's obligated to provide them more health care, whether or not it's economical. Like, let's just say there's a doctor that's like,
yeah, but no one said that they should have the positive right.
The doctor's got 5. There's a doctor that's got 5 beds, and there's 10 people that want a bed in the ICU, and does that mean the doctor has to build 5 more ICU beds and hire 5 more people?
But earlier you mentioned the adductio ad absurdum, but I think this is the adductio ad absurdum of this argument, that people are just going to want health care, and it's going to take up so much space and people's time that nobody's going to build bridges or
up a certain amount. It's going to take up a certain amount.
No doubt.
And there's always going to be a trade-off, and you just have to realize that there's a trade-off, and you have to acknowledge that. I think it's just important to acknowledge that, yeah, we all want everyone to get all the health care that they want, but at some point, people are going to want stuff that we don't have the resources to provide them unless we take something more from someone else than we give to the person that we give to. So
okay, so let's take I agree with that there, that we have to set a level, because people could want help, forever, like you said, until they die. But let's start with just the baseline. You know what I mean? I'm 35 years old. I get in a car accident. Is the government, or the people, whoever, is there an obligation to, provide health care for this person? Just the everyday cases, not the ones on the extreme. You know what I mean? But I completely agree with you that you have to set a limit at some point.
And then you have to define healthcare as well, because is a gym membership healthcare? Is because it's preventative?
Right.
Like that gets really
Right.
ambiguous,
Right.
especially if it comes down to wanting it. I want a facelift.
Yeah, I
I
don't
think
think
that we-
want. Yeah,
I
I don't
think
think
it's not.
want is a good.
I think that the want here is being taken maybe a bit too strictly,
Right.
and that when they say, like, in the same way that we would say freedom from fear, it's not saying, oh, someone's afraid here, the government should therefore provide them, like, I don't know, kittens and dogs and security blankets wherever they go, right? I think
Right.
let's not take it too literal, right? Like the government, they don't have the positive right to never be afraid. That's not a thing. But you do have the negative right to extend your wants, right? And to, like, achieve them and be able to get them without someone stepping in your way. Whether if it's, I want to get next, what you can do, you got to work. Like, there's ways to get it, and if you don't meet those ways, we're sorry. No, society is not so black and white. And these rights themselves, the words are not entirely binary. It's not all or nothing, right? Just like healthcare, it's not, oh, the government supplies healthcare, but if it doesn't, it means nothing. No one gets anything. People are dying on the streets. Right? It's not. It's neither or. It's a goal. It's something that we want to attain. It's the highest aspiration. That's what they say these rights are. They're the highest aspiration for the common people.
Right.
Kind of like what Rousseau would call the general will of the people would be these rights, would be these declarations. Right? So the rights to kind of represent all of our common wants. I'm sure that you want, or I don't know what your belief is, Amy, or anyone else, but we all want access to healthcare. We all want to be able to, if we're sick, we can go and pay for the doctor.
Right? I can say I didn't realize that this was a goal and an aim that you were reading from. So that's my apologies.
That's all right. No, I'm reframing it now because I think that it's, when we're looking at human rights, and many of them, for example, like we look at the positive right to education. Right? The question is, what type of education? Which way of education? Well, it's the right to do it, the right to go for it, the right to assemble it. Right?
It doesn't mean that you don't hear the education and therefore say, well, if we just give everybody a master's in every subject, then nobody will, ever actually do anything. Everybody will be in college and we'll go bankrupt. That's kind of the argument that, I was hearing about the healthcare.
Well, that's more about universal education, which is also, it's already considered a right in the States. We just cap it at high school. So,
right.
Where other nations say, no, you can go further. The UN definitely thinks that you should be able to go further as well. Up to at least,
So government subsidized healthcare, is that what
that's basically, you can look at it that way, or it can be direct, or the government can control it. But at least that's up to the organization at that point.
So what's the biggest hurdle in America against that? Because I don't know if everybody here is in America, and that's kind of might be arbitrary to some people, but it is often cited that we're the only major country in the world without this system. So what the hell's going on with that?
I mean, I'm not in disagreement with you. I think.
Oh no, I was asking just.
I think the hurdles are political. Most hurdles in most nations are. Right? It's about getting everyone to agree on stuff. That's why we have democracy.
Right.
I think there are there are challenges with that, and I think if you look at I'm no expert at all, but I've had conversations on this with someone who wanted to talk about it, and comparing it to like Canada, and that you have to wait, so long to get certain procedures and stuff. So it's a trade-off. So it's as ideal as it sounds. And I worked in healthcare, and I can say that, the governmental subsidized healthcare does not offer, the same options per se, or number of visits or whatever, as some of the other like HMOs typically would. So they're not exactly something that I would want per se, but I can definitely understand the other side of that as well. It's complicated.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot. It's not as easy as it sounds.
No, it's not.
Absolutely not. It's
Now this is an interesting point. Should the government regulate classes, whether it be economic classes, geographic,
No.
racial? Should the government recognize that for policy purposes?
define class again. Like a
For
class
example,
of people.
let's say tax brackets, right? We have considered working class, middle class. We give them percentages, and the government has laws different for each class of the population. Does that violate our rights in some way? Does that judge us not based on our humanity?
Yeah, I think that's silly.
So do you think that it doesn't matter what your income is, you should be taxed the same rate? Because everyone is equal under the law?
No, I think governments have, interests and, reasons to possibly tax certain. So maybe I'm undermining my own argument here, but I think for certain reasons, certain classes should be taxed differently, or could be theoretically.
What do you think, Helen?
So it's I don't know, like I only have it's a little difficult in this one because I think there's a lot of other ways that you can. So taxing, this is difficult for me to get an exact thing on here.
Do you want to move on and get some more time later?
Yeah, that'll be it. I'll think about this.
Okay. Symmetry. You always have to.
I think there should be a flat sales tax rate, and income tax was never, allegedly unconstitutional. So there's that's a different argument perhaps, but if there's a straight flat tax rate, then that's kind of more equal. That, if you earn more money, you're going to end up paying more in taxes because you're going to be spending more money, and getting rid of the IRS completely. But we're not there yet.
We can dream.
So when you think about that, do you think that creating these classes and applying the law differently to different groups of people based on their income, right, dividing them based on income, somehow violates their right to equality under the law, where they're all viewed as individual humans rather than something else, right? Because when you look at our tax law, inherently it treats two people differently based on some arbitrary characteristic we've created. So do you think that violates some sort of rights by doing so, or do you think that it just
I think it's fuzzy, which is why the whole income, the whole sales tax thing, increase the sales tax but have it a flat rate would kind of neutralize that. I think the way it's set up, I understand why it works that way. And you can say, yeah, you make more money, you get taxed more, and you can say that's fair. But as we know, you can also skirt around those tax laws and pay less taxes than people that earn far less. So that's a fuzzy thing. I can't really express an opinion either way on that.
Okay. What about you, Scientific?
There's better solutions.
scientific. Symmetry.
What's up?
What do you think about this question?
Oh,
about human rights and being equal under the law, and the way in which we do treat people differently under the law. Personally, I'm just gonna say personally, I think it's a necessary component. I think it is paradoxical in nature.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I definitely agree with that. It's a funny thing because economically, I've lived destitute for a long time, so I'm pretty poor. I rely on the government to provide food stamps and my mental health medication. So I don't even know if I should have too much of a say because other people put more work into the system than I do, and I realize that.
So you do personally think within yourself that your vote should have less value than another person?
Not less value, but that's a hard question. I don't really know. I'd have to think about that one.
Okay, I'm glad my questions are making people think today. I'm actually very happy about this.
I kind of want to throw another wrench in that, just to kind of make it interesting. The whole notion of taxation by percentage is inherently treating people differently and placing people in economic classes just by itself. Even if we had a flat tax rate, if someone is a millionaire, instead of $1 million and you tax them 10%, that's going to be $100,000 that they have to pay to the government, which is almost $100,000 than like above someone who has almost nothing. It's so they are paying a greater share of they're paying an equal share percentage-wise of their worth of their wealth, but they are paying in just raw numbers terms like more money. So
okay, I've been thinking about it for a second, and if that's exactly what it means, being the flat tax rate, meaning like if everybody in the country pays a 10% tax, just for the example's sake, everybody, meaning from poor people to millionaires, I think it makes sense just because it has the same effect on every single one of those people. Taking 10 cents out of taking 10 cents out of the guy who has $1 affects the same guy who it affects it in the same kind of way as taking 100,000 out of a guy who has $1 million. It doesn't affect him. It doesn't affect his life. It affects their lives in the same way, which is what matters here.
Let me push back on that. How much do you think that a millionaire needs to spend in order to survive? Like, we're talking food, water, shelter.
That depends on how stingy the millionaire is.
Well,
there are hold on a second. There are millionaires that live in 1-bedroom apartments.
Sure, yeah, and they pay less of their income. That's what I'm saying. Is like someone who makes $26,000 a year is probably paying more than they earn, essentially, and going into debt just to pay ordinary bills, buy groceries, that kind of thing. And so, like, for them, their survival cost is like almost 100%, right, of their wealth. Whereas someone like Jeff Bezos, their survival cost is like 0.0001%.
Hold on a second. Well, if it's okay, yeah, but if it's flat.
But can I come in here?
If you'd like to, I was about to say. Okay, so yeah, if you feel like it, I guess.
All I was going to say is I think this exposes the paradox of the situation. So by treating people equally with a flat tax, you paradoxically treat people unequally. Because if you take 10% from Jeff Bezos and then 10% from somebody who has $100,000, you're taking a different proportion of their wealth or earning.
Or their perceived wealth in a certain cost category.
So,
I just say that because even though the number difference, even though like the actual what's going in and what's coming out is massively different, which I totally agree it would be. It does the same effect to the person when it comes down to what they've had to give up for operating or living inside of the country. It has the same effect. If Jeff Bezos loses 10% of his wealth, he gets it back in like a month. Like,
well, let's
Right,
say
exactly.
nobody in
That's
America.
what
but then next month next tax season he boxes it again, and it happens the same way. Somebody loses 10%, they make more. It boxes again.
So let's just say that just to throw this out there, I would reckon maybe no one needs more than $100,000 to survive and thrive in America. Like as soon as you hit that $100,000 mark, at least now we're talking like if it inflates in 10 years. So
Do you mean per year?
Talking right now, you don't need.
Do you mean per year?
Scientifically,
per year income.
wherever you are, it's very, very hard to hear you, and there's a lot of static and background noise.
That is bizarre. Okay. One sec.
Maybe if you could just try to log off and log back in, sometimes that helps.
Yeah. Does it sound better now? Otherwise, I will log off.
Yeah.
Way better.
Oh, weird.
Yeah.
I literally just flipped my my iPhone cord around in my phone for my headphones. Anyway, what I was trying to say is if you just throw out a number and say, okay, someone in America only needs up to $100,000 to live in any particular location and survive and have a pretty stable life, then anything above that is like excess, right? Like that's the portion, that's where like tax brackets come in. It's like if you spend 90% of your annual income on things like groceries and insurance and mortgage payments and stuff like that, and you're living a frugal life, like that is a very different thing. Like it's a very different thing for you to be taxed 10% of your income because it's the remainder of all of your income in that scenario. And then Jeff Bezos, who, you could tax him 10% of his wealth in a year or of his income in a year. And that would be substantially less in terms of like the amount that a person needs in order to survive and thrive in the world. Like for them, that's just a number on a balance sheet. They still get to keep 80-70% of their wealth, assuming they're not buying like billion-dollar like plots of land or something crazy. But even in that case, it's like that still represents like an excess of wealth.
So are we now grinding rights in their consequence?
I'm not saying that necessarily, but what I'm trying to get at is that just because you impose a flat tax rate on a population doesn't mean that everyone is treated equally under the law. Because
I agree.
Because and I guess in some ways it is consequentialist because that's sort of why law exists, is like to like produce better consequences for people in life, right? Like that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
So if we're not doing that and we're treating people equally under the law, then I would say it's like, are you really? I mean, like, I don't know. Because for me to treat someone equally, it's like, I guess it falls under, like, what do you consider to be the individual's personal responsibility for themselves versus other people's responsibility to them, the government's responsibility to them? Kind of gets into questions like that. But I just wanted to...
And you do. We end up... Oh, sorry.
My whole point was just to push back on the idea that a flat tax rate is, like, felt the same way essentially by all parties that would be taxed at that rate. I think that the feeling of getting the remainder of all of your income taxed out of your hands is a different feeling from getting a 10% reduction in your vast store of wealth that you've had for decades. Like,
I agree.
It's a very different thing.
Right. So what does this tell us about rights? This example I just brought up, I think it was good. I expected like more debate over it, but it's a paradox. We literally have a paradox in what our rights are, and we find this all the time with this debate over rights. So my opinion, personally, after reading the subject for a little bit, is that rights are simply a process in our like a social agreement or conventions that make it possible for us to be democratic and political. right? All these things aren't grounded in anything more than our agreement. That is a necessary thing for us. We agree that this is the thing we all want in between us. We all want the ability to say what we want to say without getting judged for it. And then we organize it and enshrine it. So I really do think that our rights are somewhere a function of a political entity, our governing democratic entity. And under different circumstances, these rights will also change. We'll add
Well,
more
I
to
mean,
them and less to them.
I mean, technically, if I guess if the government had 100% like mind control over the military, where they could make them do exactly whatever they wanted without like any pushback, if they wanted to, like the major government, they could just change our rights now.
But I think also what we want will change, right? And this is where the wants comes in. We all agreed that we want right X. Let's just choose the right. We all agreed to it. If none of us agreed to it, it wouldn't be a right. If 50% of us agreed to it and the other 50% didn't, then maybe we should put a border in between us and you can have your area and we can have our area. Right? So this is kind of where we're going to, that the rights are somehow an extension of our political stratification in the same way that myths that we were told ourselves years ago, right? God punishes the weak, God punishes the degenerate, right? These were myths that just existed in people's mind for the society and the world to function. I think rights are in the same way. There are idealizations, there are things that we want, the thing that we don't want, and we kind of all agree to them and enshrine a body to protect it.
I would agree with that.
So they're a secular enshrinement of God's law, metaphorically speaking.
In a sense, yeah, that's what it used to be. It used to be called God's law, but we've changed it to mean something
else. That's what I mean. Secular enshrinement of that.
Yeah, it's just from our agreement, right? When you look at political theorists from Thomas Hobbes, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who I like very much, the idea is that, yeah, the first step, we just had to agree. This is what we want. The first person to be like, actually, no, I don't want a king, was the first person to declare himself free. And we all agreed to that and created systems around that and those rights.
Absolutely.
Doodle, do you have an issue with that view of rights or symmetry or anyone?
Oh, rights are a hard concept to
that sounds good.
Develop a fundamental foundation for, that's not rooted in religious philosophy, which we have so we have a bit of a paradox, creating a secular society and, enshrining essentially contradictory principles to a large extent. I think that's in the U.S. one of the reasons why it's so difficult to have a government that isn't a paradox or a fraud. But like going back to tax policy, I think the entire IRS is demonstrably illegal and a criminal fraud that the courts won't shut down. But that's a complicated set of issues that could use its own series of discussions. But if we did that, what would happen to our functional society when, if you use constitutional law as a basis, most social services are outside legitimacy for federal government. The federal government has some authority to enforce equal protections of law, but the whole unfunded mandates or use of interstate commerce clause end up being frauds, judicial and political. I think our tax basis is how much can government get and where can they get it, not what's a legitimate system.
Yeah. It's like a corporate mindset.
Well, the first income tax that was ruled unconstitutional in 1895 was to pay off Civil War debt, and it was a fractional percentage tax on corporate income, whereas what's being called personal income isn't really income. It's an exchange of money for labor generally, which is a commercial transaction, not actual income in any honest sense.
Yeah, which is very similar to the way we are now faced with, look at our taxes and what was once ruled unconstitutional originally and became part of our day-to-day life is now necessary for some of the other rights that we enjoy now, whether it be public roads, water, subsidized water, education, right?
Well,
So
education isn't a federal issue, not in theory. It tends to be a
in theory,
massive
but
violation to the extent that HHS delves into that. But there is a reasonable argument for federal enforcement of local education. But their healthcare, you have to go out to the international level because that's not not really allowable inside U.S. law. There's another paradox level when you have things like social services that historically were part of theocratic government at the local level in U.S. states, uh, but then as the church and state wall was erected. It became illegal for government to engage in church activities. Most of the social services charity models are based
Yeah,
in religious philosophy historically.
that's
So
true.
the argument for government to engage in them at all, ignoring duties and powers limits and other federal government issues, is that it makes human needs more equitably available to everyone. But if that's outside the legitimate jurisdiction of the government involved, that ends up being a rather problematic argument.
which is why I think its base is that of convention. It's that of we decided this is what we want and this is what we're gonna do. And these are the
I think in the U.S. as a nation of minorities, and one of the foundational concepts for rights is that it's a way of trying to create an equal playing field for groups that necessarily are disparate and that don't have any kind of singular religious, philosophical, or cultural model that's universal.
Yeah, equality of opportunity, not of outcome, right?
Essentially, but not just that, but limited to certain areas of governance. There are a lot of esoteric issues that can't really be functionally defined in a way that government can implement in any kind of non-arbitrary and subjective way.
Yeah, I got you.
But what if we had equal taxation in terms of a capitation or head tax? And of course, ignoring the sloppiness in the discussion I was listening to before I was able to come on live, about income taxes. The games are played in defining income and then systemic process that is a massive historic fraud. But the federal taxation to states was originally based on apportionment, which is essentially a head tax, but just with a jurisdictional game where all the states are obligated to figure out how to, get it and deliver it.
Okay.
And at the moment, that would mean essentially, paying somewhere between $8,000 and $15,000 a head, assuming no exemptions for elderly or kids or anything, which would tend to help discourage overpopulation.
Dandan.
Yes,
So
Navek.
I just wanted to respond to when you said monarchism.
If somebody has a bunch of kids, if people with about $20,000 a year annual income have 6 kids, and they were being, taxed either through the states, or directly, which would probably require a constitutional amendment, about $14,000 a head. How do the politicians get their blood money to fuel all their programs?
So Loki,
Or
how
do they get
does all of this history and interplay? What does that tell us about the philosophical concept of rights and how rights function in our society, political life? Why they're there? What can we ground them in? Right.
Well, that it's a bit of a mess. One side is how do we create a functional model of society or something we call social justice, which ends up being an economic and philosophical question. And the other, how do we create a procedurally functional system of government for a society with inherent conflicts?
So what are those rights? What are these rights that are enshrined? What are they supposed to be?
Well, I find it interesting to compare the U.S. Constitution with the UN Charter on Human Rights. And the U.S. system is based on very limited jurisdictions that are frequently evaded, and the Bill of Rights enumerated issues, and then whatever else might be included in common law. But the Ninth Amendment is basically dysfunctional, and the 10th is modified heavily, by the four with incorporation clauses 13, 14, 15, and 19 that extend certain federal jurisdiction inside states and set up, the most litigated statutory enactment of the U.S. Constitution is from Reconstruction era, the Civil Rights Act of 1873. Just generally 42 U.S.C. 1983 actions today. And whatever that means, equal protections of law inside states, or Bivens actions, which didn't happen until about 40, 50 years ago, trying to say, well, but Congress can't exempt itself from that law either, the way they tried doing in 1873.
Correct. They tried to evade that.
Is the most litigated part of U.S. law, and it's very difficult to define clearly.
So the concept of right to be protected under the law is a right. That right is a fuzzy one. But what about the meta of it, the rights themselves, rights in general? I really want to know, like in a paragraph, so like what about human rights, whether it be freedom of speech, right to education, rights, freedom from slavery, freedom to employ, whatever all that might be. What are these meta rights? What is their narrative? What is their goal? What is the aim of having them within our political
It's
system
opportunity.
and life?
Functional just society, whatever that means, or and or you can look at them as essentially defined boundaries where they're intact if practical enforcement matches up with the theory. Although there's a much more perverse economic definition of rights, that they're whatever crumbs fall through the cracks of major institutions like government, business, and religion, in a tensioned opposition, perpetual fight with each other. It's a certain reality check to that, even if it's rather perverse.
What do you think, Nivek? I know you have a lot to say on these subjects.
I was interested when you mentioned in monarchism when people were just seen to be treated a certain way, and it was kind of a battle between subjectivity and objectivity thinking, where republic that was governed by fact and logic, rules and laws, was more taken in and adopted, where with that it's that you can't just do what you want to a person, like through mob rule or through monarchism. You have rules and laws to protect a person. So like if a group of people just got together and they said like, okay, we're just going to vote to kill him in this majority rule. The counter to that in it being a democratic republic, the republic would push back and be like, well, no, you have to establish fact and logic in your reasoning to conclude whether or not this person should be punished or not.
So Nevik, just to brush you up, the entire point of the conversation is less about objectivity versus subjectivity, epistemology, non-epistemology. We're trying to hone in and understand when we talk about human rights, what they are, why we use them, and how we can philosophically ground them. So, for example, the American Constitution grounds rights in God, in the Creator. Also grinds them in logic, right? They're inalienable, right? To be human is to have these rights, and so long as you exist, anything rejecting those rights is tyrannical. Right, you have many different. Right, you have the general will concept from France and Rousseau that I tend to ascribe to. So, what is your idea about human rights? What is their value? Where do they come from?
But you have equality, freedom, and justice
What you were saying a moment ago about the U.S. Constitution is not true. That's incitement of revolution. That's from the Declaration of Independence preamble.
That's what I meant. That's what I meant.
And that was to set up a war that arguably was for economic reasons that were made to sound more ideological. And then we had the Articles of Confederation that collapsed prior to the Constitution. That seems to be.
So, what do you think is the philosophical grounding that the founding fathers had for their rights?
Freedom, equality, and justice. It was liberal humanism in people's potential to be able to reach it.
Yeah, I think there was a massively divided set of camps where you might look at the Jeffersonians who believed in a post 14th Amendment, set of legal protections within certain limits on government, and another camp that was economic and predatory, and that really didn't think that there was much basis for them. That's why the original Constitution had rights inside its body that were rejected, and there was a side deal cut to make a Bill of Rights external to the body of our Constitution.
It was more based off the Enlightenment too. It wasn't off of religion.
Enlightenment was a separate set of philosophical and religious movements that happened mostly in New England and New York, and
with the Great Awakening with America, wasn't that from the Enlightenment?
Where do you think they ought to fall? Right, when you, Loki or Nevik, when you think about these subjects, not necessarily just the history around it, but more of what do you think about rights?
Opportunity, freedom, equality.
Yeah, but why
opportunity?
Why opportunity, freedom, and why all of that? Where'd you get that from? Right, that's the question. Where does it come from? What's the result of it?
That's to be able to progress without any time for.
So, like a pragmatic reason for you.
That's for society.
I think that model comes from a somewhat evolved society that has to be functioning above a rather basal level. Because if you look at China and their notion of being grossly oppressive by some of the U.S. and Western European standards, they're trying to figure out how do we keep food and medical care and far more basal needs for 1 billion people in an overpopulated country. Then you move over to India, where it's far worse, and they don't even try to a large extent, but they do have a lot of those class issues you were mentioning earlier, structurally defined into their system rather heavily. And I don't know, if you look at the UN Charter on Human Rights, they have a first paragraph that's all nice and idealistic, spelling out things to be protected, and then a second section that says more or less, except if this isn't part of your national policy, in which case you can ignore all that legitimately, as long as you don't do selective oppression of individuals as opposed to everyone. And that becomes a major problem in the U.S. when most of our discriminatory and oppressive issues of criminal law and social policy are state level, not national. So technically, we don't qualify for those exemptions. But yeah.
So what do you, Loki? What do you personally think about immigrants who came to the country at a very young age? And they're not recognized as full citizens because they can't vote. Let's say they've been here 20 years, but since their parents came illegally, they can vote. Do you consider that a violation of human rights?
Well, I don't consider voting a right of non-citizens, but I see our immigration laws as badly bastardized, where there are big agribusiness corporations that have managed to create a system of work permits that they can pretty much dominate to the exclusion of smaller competitors who end up, for lack of labor to be producing fish and farm goods and poultry and such, end up being more or less forced to work outside the law in order to exist. And ideally, it would be nice to have a political system that could come up with a functional, update to that. That's not designed to just play favorites for people who make the right political donations in a corrupt system that's badly broken with obstructionist policy to attempts to fix it. I'm not sure how to accomplish that, but it seems clear that it's long overdue.
Okay. How about you, Nevek? What do you think about that question? Does that violate human rights in your opinion?
Well, I think I lean towards saying yeah. It is a policies. It's more. I see things like with the policies America have with other countries that harm it and influence it in a negative way in as a cause. I don't to address the problem. I mean, it's like if you do anything negative and people flee for their life, that's what's going to happen. So don't meddle in people's countries in a way at its expense to harm it.
Could you state that without using the word negative? Because negative implies a value judgment without specifying any basis for what you're interpreting that way.
If you do things at the expense of a country for your gain.
Like
it
what?
Isn't like companies trying to prop up U.S. companies and harm. Shit. And trying to harm anything that's local for the benefit of the people of the country.
Okay, so let's say you're a fisherman off at the Asian coast with a sail or oar-powered boat, because you don't have to go out very far for your catch, and U.S. bankers and foreign aid help develop the industry into something that pollutes the onshore water tremendously, requires buying more expensive boats with motors, but we provide a banking system of predatory lending to make that easier, and a whole spiral to the financial benefit of predators pretending to be helpful with economic development that ends up trashing an ecosystem but enlarging an industry. How does that fit in? I'd look at it as a little more complicated than that model addresses.
I don't know. I don't have any details. I'm just saying when you work with a small, poor country, you don't do things working with it in a harmful way that has a negative effect of having people come over the border.
You're saying that you ought not to? You're saying that you ought not to? So let's say...
Yeah, because
the policies that we have...
America gets the repercussions.
So the policies that we have with Mexico should not be in such a way that makes their lives worse and forces them to come over the border. Is that what you're saying?
Or like Guatemala. I mean, America has a lot of bad history in South America that you see the things that, of people coming over.
Which human right do you think that would violate?
Good question.
It would violate violate both Americans, because when you harm, if you harm people in other countries to come into another country or work to exploit them in cheap labor. No. I'm answering the question. To exploit them in cheap labor, you're taking the Americans can't compete if you work for nothing. So like what Yoki was saying about you have people to come in and they work for little of nothing, and that's the thing. It's kind of like the things that are harmful in other countries in in making people poor, it hurts Americans too, because the world's more connected, and jobs get shipped
a government
overseas.
doesn't have the right to represent the will of the people, even if that will is negative for their own well-being.
Well, I mean, I get what you're saying. Like, people vote against their interests. I don't
Right?
know.
People vote against their interests all the time, and it's not the right of the government to represent the will of the people. And by saying no, the government should not represent the will of the people. Actually, what the government should
That's
do,
complicated.
right?
Nivik, buddy, I get what you're saying, man. He's just trying to get you to be more specific and use less vague terms.
Mm-hmm. But there might not be an answer to this, right? It might be paradoxical. There might be a type of paradox that exists with the way in which governments work. And that if we look at the result of governments as to only have good consequence, we're missing the ends for the means, right? Maybe that's not the way to do it. Maybe the way to do it is to recognize human rights, to have the government recognize general will. And by recognizing that agreed upon consensus, what everybody agrees they want, and creating laws and systems around it, that's the best way for the future. That's the best way to elevate human well-being.
There are a lot of things that work indirectly that government can't effectively do. There are a lot of topics where you can pass a law saying, you have to do this to fix everything, and that the law can't do. But if you improve access to water, say going into an African context where females traditionally have been responsible for hauling water from unsafe sources, up to cisterns and village that are unsafe storage, that takes a lot of time if you're walking several miles a day, carrying about as much weight as you can manage back and forth, and that's in lieu of school. Education, then gets stunted, but overpopulation tends to result, which taxes the society. Is a more educated, industrially functional populace, especially in certain societies where that's traditionally, put men into manual labor and women into basic household support with water and food. It ends up being a better or functionally more effective way of controlling overpopulation than laws that say you can't overpopulate or you have to be educated or not. In some countries have said that females can't be educated and have had rules for them that overload them, either being barefoot and pregnant or doing menial tasks like that.
Okay, guys. So for me, my time is up. I do have to run, but I will be back later on the Trav, maybe like 8 o'clock, maybe like 2 hours or so. But you all keep the conversation going, keep talking, bicker, message people who you disagree with to come into the chat. That makes it funner. So I will be back on later. Thanks for an awesome conversation.
All right. It sounds like you agree that it's really difficult to have a functional model that idealistically meets all of the practical and theoretical standards we ascribe to rights. Is that realistic?
Absolutely. I don't think that it's like we have to make sure it gets done by all needs. All like, that we have the right to healthcare means people have to be sick in the street, their dogs eating dogs, but if they have healthcare, we did it, guys. We did it. No, obviously it's very complicated. Right. There's many different facets to it, and it's good to think about rights and to think about the role of government, especially when we try to vote and participate in it. That was like the main goal of me wanting to do this today, because in the Discord we've had some conversation around rights and voting, whether voting some groups should have it, some groups shouldn't. I thought talking about human rights and parsing it out from a philosophical perspective is the best thing for it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, for everyone watching, come join the discussion, like, subscribe, helping Pangburn out. He should be back soon. I think he's just had to make an errand or something. Okay, guys. See you later.
Have a good one.
Thanks, man.
No problem.
Bye.
It was a lot of fun.
Yes, sir.
So, do you want to stay up here or move down to the tavern?
I think the tavern. I don't know. I don't know which one he'd. I mean,
Well, if
what's better
Travis
for
isn't
them.
around to close this out, it'd probably be good to just move down to the tavern, and that would give it a natural end point, which I think we just
Sounds
hit,
good.
didn't we?
Is it still live?
I don't know about.
Well, Travis is up muted and watch stream is on, so and it was on YouTube before, so probably.
Okay.
Let's move down to the tavern.
Tavern. Hello? How do I get to the tavern? The tavern.